All right. Hey, Glass. So, this is going to be your background lecture on the Windup Girl. We've wrapped Dune up and we are now jumping into our next text. And I want to give you a little forewarning that, like maybe some of you experienced in Dune, the beginning of the Windup Girl is a little challenging. You're having to immerse yourself into an entirely new fictional world. There's a lot of world building that's going on. You're going to feel a little confused, a little off balance at first, but I promise you, like I said with Dune, if you give it time, you will start to feel the world. You'll start to understand the world. This story, as some of you can probably note from the cover here, was a Hugo and a Nebula Award winner. So, like Dune, it is won both of the highly prestigious awards given to science fiction literature stories. And as I mentioned earlier, there aren't many of them who've won both the Hugo and the Nebula Award. So, again, one of my requirements for a book for this class, at least novel length book. All right, so let's jump into it. There's a lot to cover here. Um, the first one is that we have all of these things going on, and I just leave them. I just left them in a list here. So this is your world building chunk. So we are in a slightly apocalyptic future. It's post petroleum, so there is no gas and there's very little electricity. And so all energy that's stored energy, because think about it, gas, people are like, oh man, a gallon of gas is so expensive. It's up to $3.50. And, a funny joke. And obviously, I know gas prices negatively impact people's finances, not trying to disregard that. But the irony is that let's say your car gets 20 miles to the gallon and you told somebody, okay, how about you push my car and I'll give you $3.50 and you'll push it about 20 miles for me. Um, this is the kind of world we're in. There's no gas, there's very little electricity. And so things are far more mechanical. So, for those who know cyberpunk, we're going to be moving into this realm. This is not cyberpunk and this is not steampunk, but we are going to see dirigibles. We are going to see sailboats. We're going to see mechanized things and bicycles. But this genre, which I'll explain all of this for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this is referred to as eco punk, and it's going to follow all of the basis that's going to go back to cyberpunk, which is a great subgenre of science fiction that we're going to be studying for the next few units. But this is actually eco punk. So large corporations are in control in these calorie monopolies, large corporations. And I'll get into some of this when I start breaking into the first reading analysis, the podcast for the first few chapters. I'll point out where some of these are located in the text, but pay attention to them. They're pure cal, and they're literally called calorie companies. And so these calorie companies, because of genetic plagues and genetic modification gone bad, which is sometimes referred to in here as gene hacking. So scientists going in and hacking different genes. This has blown up in scientists' face, meaning there's all sorts of unintended consequences. They screwed up and they screwed up real bad. And so what this has led to is massive crop failures and massive global level extinction of certain species that we depend on for our food supply. So this gene hacking is bad because it leads to crop failure or full special collapse. There's all sorts of pests that they inadvertently were created as a result of their genetic tinkering. Some of these are like animal pests. Some of them are molds. Some of them are cybiscosis, this thing that'll get into the human lungs. And so growing enough food is very difficult. And so this whole period is referred to as the early period, the period that we're in before the book, where we have petrochemicals, we have energy, and we have the power on, and all this stuff is referred to as the expansion. Um, expansion, and this period that they're in is referred to as the reduction, and so everything's starting to slide into you know post-apocalyptic nightmarish situation. We have global warming as a result of massive earlier massive corporate greed that led to the burning of the remaining petroleum products. There is some coal lingering out there, but even that's not in substantial enough quantities to make much of a difference. So everything that gets done is done by animals. Now, I will tell you in this story, like Dune, even though we're going to be talking a lot about robots in our other content for the course, I will forewarn you there are no robots. So don't look for any sneaky, quiet, hidden robots or anything. There aren't any. They're not here. I know that's sort of a spoiler, but just the way it is. You're going to see the dirty underbelly of society in this book. I do want to forewarn you in chapter 3, I'll write this notification up there, but just want to make sure there are some sexually explicit scenes. If you may be triggering for some people, if you feel you need to skip those scenes, you are more than welcome to skip them. They won't, have a negative impact on your understanding of the text. It will. I'll talk about those later on. They're sensitive. If you feel you need to skip over them, no problem. All right, so those are kind of the basic pieces here that we're working with. It's a bad place. Oh, and it happens to be set in Southeast Asia. And so we'll get there in a few minutes. I'm going to show you a map of where things take place. But this is a character-driven story and very, very character focused. Every single chapter focuses on the perspective of one particular character. And I'm going to try to put these around. I'm going to move these around a little bit where they belong in terms of importance. And so Anderson, is a pretty big character. Hak Seng is a pretty big character. And for another character that's pretty substantial is Jai D and one of his lieutenants, Kanya. So I'm going to go through. You're going to need to pay attention and review this because, again, it's a complex. You've got this world building in this post-apocalyptic, genetic modified future world, and then you've got the dark underbelly of a Southeast Asian post-apocalyptic city. And the first character that we bump into of importance right in the very first chapter is Anderson, and he is a calorie man. He works for one of the calorie companies, and he's basically a genetic spy. He is there to research and to find out about genetic material that's in the Thai kingdom. And so not necessarily a terrible person, but questionable. So unlike a romantic story, we're moving into detective stories, and we're moving into the gritty underbelly of society in these next chunks of stories that we're going to study. And the characters aren't, romantic heroes are quite lovable, and we find ourselves really appreciating who they are. Here, when we get to Anderson, when we get to most of these characters, maybe excluding Emiko, they're not very redeeming. All right, so moving on, Yates is Anderson's predecessor, also a calorie company spy, sent to develop a kink spring factory as a kind of a business cover for one of the calorie companies. So kink springs are these springs. Literally, they said this is going to get mechanical. They're literally springs that are specially treated, and they even use algae in the treatment of these springs to pack in massive amounts of energy. And then these springs can be mechanically placed in bikes. And as they unwind, they can propel a bike for, not a massive amount of distance, not like a gallon of gas, but they can provide stored energy, because energy storage, it's a pretty big deal. We know, just, kind of going in an offshoot right now, basically these are like batteries. Without petrochemicals, specifically gasoline, we have a hard time, even with all of our great technological advancements and Tesla and Elon Musk and all these other companies working on the problem. We have a hard time making a vehicle right now that can go over 300 miles without, a substantial electrical charge. And we've been working on this problem for a while. So you take petrochemical away, and even with the developments we've had in battery technology, our life would change pretty substantially. And imagine, this is obviously all fictional, but imagine we just wipe that stuff off the board. King Springs, light duty, mechanical battery. Yates is developing them. He loves King Springs. Anderson doesn't care about King Springs, although Anderson is left managing the King Spring factory. Hak Sung is his assistant and is referred to as a Chinese yellow card. He is called a yellow card. He escaped religious persecution in China when China was collapsing. So you basically have to imagine that population centers in the lead up to where we are historically in this story, population centers everywhere have just imploded. There's been massive acts of genocide, starvation, people, all sorts of plagues, people coming down with all sorts of issues. The population of the world is substantially smaller. Hak Sung, he's a survivor. He's gritty, and so Hak Sung is Anderson's assistant. Also a sneaky guy with entirely his own agenda in this whole world. He has a young helper who a young loyal helper who her name is Mai. She's not a major character, but she's going to pop up throughout the text repeatedly. So pay attention to her. Emiko. Emiko is kind of our female heroine. You could say femme fatale. She is a gene hacked human. She is Japanese. She's from Japan, and she's what's referred to as a wind-up girl, a wind-up. So as you can imagine, she's pretty important. She has this stutter stop motion so that they can tell that she's a wind-up, but she is developed to be a businessman, a wealthy businessman's assistant, and for lack of a better term, kind of sex slave, and a very high end call girl type situation. Wind up girls are not cheap, and yet she was left there in Thailand by her previous owner. So there's a lot of really complex moral things going on in this story too. So pay very obviously Emiko, the wind up girl. The book is named after Emiko. Pay very close attention to Emiko. She is going to be the center of our book, both morally and structurally as the story progresses. All right, Jaidi, another very important character. He works for the environmental ministry, and so he is in charge, or one of the top enforcers of their environmental policies, because there are so many plagues, both genetic and pest related, coming into the food throughout the book. It's important for the environmental ministry to kind of protect the genetic viability of Thailand. And so Jaidi is what's referred to, both Jaidi and Kanya are referred to as white shirts. They are pure in terms of they believe that the Thai kingdom should have nothing outside of the Thai kingdom should come in, no goods, because anytime you import goods, you risk bringing in genetic hitchhikers or problems. And so they don't think foreigners should be there, and no outside things should come in. And anything that does come in, they have to inspect and maintain and watch. And Kanya is one of his fellow or underlings, one of his fellow officers, so to speak. So this is the kind of main group of characters, but then Anderson is going to have a bunch. There's going to be a bunch of other foreigners. He's American. There's going to be a bunch of other foreigners, even though the environmental ministry doesn't like them. A bunch of other foreigners who Anderson is going to be in contact with and hang out. And there's other people in the environmental ministry. And there's another one that I'm going to talk about a little bit, but that's called the trade ministry. And there are a few characters from the trade ministry. Less important though than this cadre of characters are sort of our main characters. So learn them, pay attention. If you're struggling, or like you did with Dune, if you're struggling to keep track of characters early on in the book, keep a character journal. You get to the beginning of the chapter, figure out who it is, write down the character's name, and then as you're reading, write down some characteristics about them. Next chapter, do the same thing. When you come back to another chapter, let's say on Anderson, flip back to that Anderson page and you don't have to go crazy, just some things that'll jog your memory to really help you dive into the text quickly and efficiently. All right. So political power players. I just talked about this a little bit, but at the top of the Thai government, we have this child queen, and she's a bit mysterious. I'll tell you right off the bat, we don't ever learn a whole lot about her, other than that she is, as she ages, she will ascend to the throne, and she has some advisors or people who basically rule over her or rule in her for her while she's a child. Again, I mentioned this already, but we have two major political, and they're kind of at odds with each other. It's kind of the trade ministry versus the environmental ministry. The environmental ministry is really concerned about keeping the diseases and the gene hacks out of Thailand so that they're not killing people, in mass events. The trade industry, or the trade ministry, is trying to keep trade going and trying to use, because Thailand's doing pretty well, trying to use some of the wealth and the success from Thailand to improve their lot through trade. So the trade ministry, they're responsible for making sure that the dirigibles, which dirigible is like a zeppelin, these big airships moving across the sky, and then clipper ships, which are sort of these fancy sailboats that can shoot harpoon kites way up into the sky, and then the kites pull the boats along, and that's what they use for massive large scale trade, the largest scale trade they can accomplish, again, without petrochemicals. So on the flip side, the environmental ministry is constantly trying to combat or make sure that there are no mass extinction events, and they're constantly fearful of disease. And you will see when this Jai character, pay attention when Jai goes home, what his interaction with disease is like, because these invasive diseases become quite personal, because characters have lost loved ones from these, and they're very real and very potent. So this is kind of that political makeup. In the midst of this, as you can imagine, we go back to that Anderson character, and Anderson is sort of in the mix of this because his last name is Lake. Sometimes he'll be referred to as Mr. Lake. Anderson Lake is kind of in the middle of this. And remember, he is a corporate spy for the calorie companies. And the calorie companies are mostly American. They're genetic modification companies that control rice. Like one of the iterations of rice is called Utex, which is from the University of Texas, Utex rice. And it's a variant that isn't susceptible to these diseases. And so these calorie companies then sell these patents and or these genetically modified variants to the people, but they make a lot of money off of it. And so if you don't have the money, then you starve. And so the calorie companies are not popular. They're like, the epitome of corporate abuse. And so Anderson, as a corporate spy for the calorie companies, is kind of right here in this middle ground, doesn't want anybody to know, but he's trying to do his spy work and he doesn't want to get busted. And so what he's doing is he's sneaking around the markets looking for new or revived, previously extinct, revived plant species for food production. So newer revived plant species. And he's constantly on the lookout. The very first chapters of the book, he's going to have bumped into a rambutan that hadn't existed, a fruit from Southeast Asia that hadn't existed in, 100 years or whatever. So Anderson, a very interesting character. Okay, moving on. So here's that rambutan I was just talking about. This is Anderson in the market. So what's going on with this gene hacking is it's sort of like we could compare it to Jurassic Park. And I'm just gonna say JP, in Jurassic Park, they bring back dinos, and they bring back dinos by extracting a little bit of DNA from a dino mosquito, and they take that DNA and they actually recreate dinos. Now, is this science fiction? Absolutely. But what are we currently playing with? Because DNA that's that old, that's pure enough to actually do that, becomes complicated, even if they could do it, which they can't completely yet. But there are some theories, or even moving past theories, that taking elephant DNA and taking DNA from the woolly mammoth. I'm not sure if I'm spelling that right, but from the woolly mammoth and the elephant, that we may all see in our lifetimes basically some genetically hacked, genetically modified version of I'm going to just say a woolly mammoth version 2. And that's actually supposedly, I mean, I'm not a geneticist, and I know there's a lot of technological pieces that need to come into play before that can happen. But people are speculating. Remember that extrapolating, speculating. This is moving from extrapolation, from speculation into extrapolation, that this type of stuff is going to occur in our lifetimes. So, Anderson, anyways, all of these species have gone extinct. The nightshades, tomatoes, potatoes, all sorts of food species that we use to feed ourselves have gone extinct. But Thailand, for some reason, has been reviving. They have a gene hacker. Somebody has been reviving extinct food species. And Anderson is trying to get to the bottom of it. So he believes that they have somewhere a seed bank. And in the seed bank, as you can imagine, is a whole lot of genetic information. And as you can imagine, who would like that genetic information? Well, of course, the calorie company would love that genetic information. So, in this opening scene, he's combing the market and he comes across a rambutan. Now, many of you may not know what a rambutan was. In fact, before I read this book years ago, I didn't either. I'd seen them, but I didn't really know what they were. But they're this fruit that grows obviously in these like bushes, trees, that has this spiky. I don't think it's not spiky, but it has like tendrils on the outside. And then when you peel that outside husk off, or you cut it open, there's this white, really sweet, sugary flesh. So when he's buying the maw in the early scenes, this is what he's getting. Okay, so some of the species that have been extinct are nightshades. And so these are some nightshades that some of you might. And so early in the scene, all of nightshades are basically extinct, except Thailand has been able to bring back tobacco. People are actually having smokes and stuff. And there are other things showing up, but tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, okra, goji berries, peppers, tomatillos, sorrel, gooseberries, ground cherries, pepino melons, tobacco, paprika, cayenne pepper, and capsicum. These are all some of the common nightshades that we currently use for food production. So all of these are gone. Now, I brought up the woolly mammoth and the elephant because they also have in this book these things, and this is going to show up megadonts. And megadonts are these massive elephant esque creatures that have been gene hacked. They are fantastic converters of food or grass into mechanical energy. And so they've actually gene hacked these specialized species to help with the absence of petrochemicals. And this is a great image here that some artists put together for this story. And as you can see, we have all around this modern Bangkok where the story takes place. We have these canals and these waterways because the sea levels are rising. So kind of infusing. In fact, the city has a levee all around it to keep the seawater out. And here would be one of these markets. And here these guys are taking this megadon to some factory to do work. We have dirigibles up in the sky, moving some of the trade goods that the trade ministry has gotten in. And we see these buildings, and these buildings, as you can imagine, without electricity and modern energy, um, become very complicated to maintain. So they're actually slowly being mined, and some of their materials are slowly being extracted. Some of them are still being used with mechanical elevators and stuff like that, but for the most part, they're being torn down. So this has a lot going on in it, this picture. So, anyways, okay, moving on. All right. I've talked about all these things a little bit, just some more art to look at. So, add a version of a dirigible with some containers underneath it, like a kind of a modern container ship transportation style with a more traditional, older technology. Again, here we have the waterways under a bypass, what was used to be a car bypass. Now it's providing shelter for these markets and these streets that are slowly turning into waterways in some districts of the town. Here we have a megadont, and you can see these megadons are just massive, bigger than even normal, real non-gene hacked elephants. And here we have one of the megadont union members, someone who controls the megadons and moves them around, escorting this giant beast. You can notice they have four tusks, at least in this picture. I can't remember if they do in the book or not. I think they might. So yeah. So then one last thing, just showing you a map. Showing you a map of where we are. So this story takes place in Bangkok, right here. Modern, Southeast Asia. This is China. So Hawk Sung would be, I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly where he's from, but he was from China, and he immigrated down to Thailand. So even in Thailand, he is an immigrant, as are some of the other characters that you're going to bump into. And sometimes we'll hear of, um, deep in the jungle. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but up the river, when they refer to up the river, they're talking about this geography in here. But most of the story, aside from some references, takes place right in Bangkok, post-apocalyptic, calorically starved, plague-ridden, corporate creepy corporate control powers over the oceans. But it all occurs right here in Bangkok. So that's your primer. Let me know if you have any questions, if anything comes up as you start reading. By all means, let me know so that I can help you unravel anything that's confusing you, and that'll keep you on track. All right.